The committee will come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the passing of one of our colleagues, Senator Mike Enzi. He was a long-serving member of this committee and someone who really embodied the nonpartisan tradition of this committee as well. He was always a willing partner when it came to common sense legislative ideas, and our thoughts and our prayers are with his family. And I'd like to just take a brief moment of silence for us to honor his memory. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today and for your service to our nation. In accepting the nomination to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, you inherited a number of very serious challenges. You have a difficult job, and I appreciate your unwavering commitment. And I have been pleased to see the department and the administration take concrete steps to combat threats against American communities, including the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Today, this committee will discuss how we can help you and the dedicated workforce at DHS better protect the American people from the threats, from these threats by examining the administration's budget request for 2022. Every year, the Homeland Security Secretary testifies before this committee to discuss the tough challenges that were made to arrive at these final budgetary numbers, but we often don't hear about how those decisions were actually made. The numbers in this budget proposed represent decisions that will have a real effect on the safety of the American people, and it's our duty to carefully consider your proposal and thoroughly evaluate the process that led you to these conclusions. This year, I'm pleased to see that your proposed budget focuses on tackling some of the most serious challenges and threats facing our nation, challenges that have only been compounded by a pandemic that has taken the lives of more than 600,000 Americans and left serious economic destruction in its wake. And it's clear these threats to the American people will only grow and continue to evolve. This is especially true as we continue a scourge of ransomware attacks against everything from K-12 schools, federal networks, small businesses, a major pipeline, and even meat processing plants. These attacks, which continue to disrupt countless American lives, show that we must ensure that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and other federal entities responsible for our federal defenses have the necessary resources to formulate an all-of-government response to foreign adversaries and criminal organizations who are relentlessly targeting network vulnerabilities and disrupting American lives and livelihoods. At the same time, the department must also be able to fight against physical threats that put thousands of American communities at risk. In recent years, violence driven by white supremacist and anti-government ideologies has continued to rise and lead to real-world harm, as we saw from the deadly breach of the United States Capitol. I'm pleased to see that this year's budget request supports addressing the root causes of this horrific violence by supporting innovative, community-based methods for countering and collecting more information and data on domestic terrorism while respecting the privacy of American citizens. In addition to addressing these significant challenges, I look forward to hearing how the department plans on investing in effective and modern border security that not only protects our nation, but also provides for the efficient and fair processing of asylum seekers at our southern border. I hope to also continue working together to ensure secure and efficient lawful trade and travel at our nation's ports of entry so that border states like Michigan can continue to remain hubs for international commerce. As the department continues to address these significant challenges, it's also essential they work to counter threats posed by climate change through disaster resilience and hazard mitigation. Early investments in adaptive mitigation and resiliency efforts will save taxpayer dollars in the long run. I appreciate that this budget request highlights the need to allocate more funding to reduce the risk for communities when disaster strikes. It's my hope that this budget and our discussion here today will reflect that broad scope of challenging responsibilities that you have, but also the department's opportunities. Secretary Mayorkas, I look forward to hearing from you today. Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for taking a moment of silence this morning to recognize and pay tribute to our former colleague, Mike Enzi. Mike was the best senator, the best person, and our prayers go to his family, to Diane and his kids, and the people of Wyoming during this difficult time. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the committee. Your appearance before this committee comes at a critical time because the capabilities of your department have never been needed more. We are facing simultaneous threats, as you know, and as we have discussed. Of course, our border is facing the worst migrant crisis that we've had in over 2 decades. It's obviously true that we need a new approach. What we're doing now isn't working. It's the worst crisis in terms of migration. It's the worst crisis in terms of illicit drugs and other contraband coming across the border. And we need to hear from you about that today. Second, our nation is under attack in a cyber war. We've seen this repeatedly. The chairman just talked about it, the SolarWinds hack, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, and so many others demonstrate the vulnerability of both our public and private systems and our critical infrastructure. We've got to be better at anticipating the next threat and better at defending ourselves and pushing back. That's why I hope today we can discuss how to ensure that CISA, the organization within DHS, is more effective at leading this effort in defending against cyber threats across the government and within the private sector. And not just defending, but also going on offense. Third, whether it's foreign terrorists or domestic violent extremists, there are significant threats to our communities in my state of Ohio and across the country. Our communities of faith are facing more threats. The department's work at a national level is critical, as are initiatives like the Nonprofit Security Grant Program that puts federal expertise and some resources to work in helping communities of faith and other nonprofits be able to address and prepare for a variety of threats. I'd like to focus on the situation at the border, where 2 surges are still underway. As we just talked about, the surge of unlawful migrants is at the highest level it's been in over 2 decades. And the surge of illicit narcotics, particularly the deadly synthetic opioids like fentanyl, which unfortunately over the most recent year for which we have data, which would be 2020, have resulted in more overdose deaths in our country than ever in our history. Both of these surges are at record levels. In the first case, the administration's own policies have caused unlawful migration to increase every single month since Inauguration Day. This threatens the safety and security of our country and that of the migrants themselves, who are exposed to these dangerous and volatile journeys north. President Biden told us all in March that the elevated border numbers were seasonal, and we should expect those to go down as the summer approached. But now that we are in the hot and dangerous summer months, border encounters have not gone down. In fact, they continue to rise. And again, so does the risk involved in making that journey north, particularly through the deserts of northern Mexico. And with COVID-19 cases now on the rise again, unfortunately, we see the administration actually considering repealing the COVID-related Title 42 for all adults without adequate preparation, potentially deepening this crisis further. We've done this before. We did this with regard to children, unaccompanied children. We did this with regard to families. Most families, in fact, are, I'm told, not subject to Title 42 anymore. We did it starting on Inauguration Day, thinking that this was something that would open up the border more. But we didn't prepare at all. The administration was overwhelmed with unaccompanied children, overwhelmed with families. And my hope is that that decision which occurred at the time when COVID-19 was raging all throughout our country, will teach us some lessons about what to do now. DHS was not prepared, and we've got to be sure that DHS understands that's not appropriate going forward. It's very clear to us what's likely to happen if Title 42 is lifted for adults, because it's already happened for unaccompanied kids and families. It's certainly very clear to the Border Patrol. When I was down there earlier this year with you, Mr. Secretary, I had the chance to visit with a lot of Border Patrol agents and talk to them about this. They are very concerned, as you know. They said they'd be overwhelmed the moment Title 42 Public Health Authority was revoked for adults. I just got back from a bipartisan delegation trip meeting with the presidents of Ecuador, Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala. All four of these countries have sent more and more migrants to the United States over the past several months. All four of those presidents said they want their young people to stay in their country. They don't want them coming north to the United States. They want them to stay and be part of the future of their own country. However, because of our broken asylum system, they're coming north, in large measure because traffickers can rightly say to these migrants, prospective migrants, and to their families, because of the way our asylum system works in particular, if you come north and come to the border, you can come in. You can come in and you can stay. And those coyotes, those human smugglers, those traffickers who don't care about the humane treatment of the migrants, who don't care about their well-being, have the ability to say that because our system effectively provides for that. The presidents of those countries don't understand why America would want to create this pull factor. We talk a lot about the push factor, and I think all of us want to do more with regard to dealing with the circumstances in Central America and elsewhere with regard to the push factor, but we're also providing the pull factor, and that's not fair. Turning to the second part of the surge, recent sobering news from the Center for Disease Control says that overdose deaths have risen to record levels, and the main driver of that is fentanyl. It's a harsh reminder of the work that's yet to be done. On this committee, we've worked hard to put in place the STOP Act. We passed the legislation. Now it's being implemented by the department, by CPB in particular. CBP has done a better and better job, in my view. They still have not been able to work with the Postal Service to meet all the requirements of the legislation, but frankly, it's helped. The problem is, instead of coming by the U.S. mail system into our communities, this poison is now being sent through Mexico. Often the precursors are sold to Mexico, then it's made into fentanyl, then it comes over our southern border. That's what all the data shows. The June CBP operational statistics show that seizures of fentanyl so far this fiscal year are 78% higher than all of fiscal year 2020. If we're seizing that much, how much are we missing? A lot, according to the Border Patrol. We need to hear how this budget request ensures that your department has the tools and resources needed to stop this surge of deadly drugs at all parts of the border. Of course, these two issues are related because the traffickers are not just smuggling people. Many are narco traffickers also smuggling these poisons into our communities. I was pleased to see that your budget request includes increased funding for technology modernization at our ports of entry, including modern scanning equipment to help efficiently detect and stop illegal drugs and other prohibited items from entering our country. I've seen some of that technology working in person during my trips to the border, and I think this is an important part of ensuring that our borders are both enabling commerce and trade for the economic vitality of U.S. communities, and that we're stopping the contraband. At the same time, I was very disappointed to see the budget request de-emphasize funding in key areas for customs and border protection when we need their capabilities more than ever to combat criminal activity like trafficking in humans, illicit drugs. I'm very concerned about technology investments that are not in this budget. Investments in barriers, towers, and cutting-edge autonomous technology, as an example, between those ports of entry is cut in this budget. I was particularly surprised to see the technology that would be married with barriers was cut in this budget, because that traditionally has been a pretty bipartisan effort to ensure that, yes, we have barriers in place where appropriate, but that it's accompanied by technology. Without the technology, the barriers are far less effective. And yet that's cut in this budget. I don't understand that. And maybe I can be corrected in this hearing, because I can't believe that technology would be being reduced at this time. I hope to talk today about your vision for improving the tools and technology that's available to our law enforcement personnel at a time when they deserve our support, given the crisis at the border. Mr. Secretary, again, thank you very much for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Secretary Mayorkas, it is the practice of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if you will stand and raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. You may be seated. Secretary Mayorkas is the 7th Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Previously, he served the department as Deputy Secretary and as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and began his public service at the Department of Justice. Thank you for appearing before the committee today. I understand that you have limited time with us and that you have a very important counter-narcotics engagement immediately following this hearing. So we appreciate that you will be available for only one round of questions. We also look forward to you appearing before the committee in 2 months for our annual threats hearing, and I will now recognize you for 7 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you again today. Allow me to join you in expressing my sorrow upon the passing of Senator Enzi, with whom I had the privilege of working in my prior tenure in the Department of Homeland Security. And allow me to join you, please, in expressing my prayers and thoughts for his family at this difficult time. Every day, the 240,000 public servants of the Department of Homeland Security confront an increasingly complex and dynamic threat landscape. They do so with unflinching dedication to our mission and a deep sense of purpose. I'm here today to ask for your continued support of their work. As you know, it is the resources afforded by this Congress that enable my outstanding colleagues to keep the American people safe, and that enable us to recruit and retain our nation's most talented professionals. The President's fiscal year 2022 budget helps us meet these essential goals. First, the President's budget invests in a secure border. It directs $1.2 billion toward more effective and modern port and border security, including a $655 million investment toward modernizing our land ports of entry. Another $47 million to integrate Customs and Border Protection detection capabilities, and robust investments in border surveillance technology. There is no request for additional border wall construction. Our team at Customs and Border Protection employs a wide array of proven tactics and cutting-edge technology to defend the American people against dangerous threats to our borders. To support this challenging task, the President's budget includes $37 million to integrate aerial border security technologies that will provide a common operating picture for law enforcement. This will enable our Border Patrol agents, regardless of their location, to act based on consistent, shared information. This is absolutely essential to protecting our homeland in the 21st century, and it is just a snapshot of the incredible work being done on the front lines as part of our layered approach to border security. I urge you respectfully to support the President's budget for these requested investments for smart and strategic border security measures. Second, consistent with the President's recently released immigration blueprint, calling for safe, orderly, and humane policies and practices to govern immigration, this budget reflects our administration's commitment to rebuilding our system into one that is fair, efficient, and upholds our nation's values and our laws. It includes a new discretionary request for $345 million for U.S. citizenship and immigration services to reduce the backlog of applications and petitions, ramp up interview capacity, and meet our goal of welcoming up to 125,000 refugees per year. To ensure the safe and humane treatment of migrants at the southwest border, the request includes $163 million for medical needs for those in Customs and Border Protection custody. Third, the budget tackles a rising threat to our national security, cyber attacks. The President is requesting new resources for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as it is commonly known, which leads the effort to defend against cyber threats and promote resilience across the federal government. We are seeking $2.1 billion for cyber activities, which builds on the $650 million already provided to CISA in the American Rescue Plan. This funding will help CISA respond to government-wide breaches, increase cyber defenses, hire qualified experts, and obtain support services to protect and defend critical infrastructure and federal IT systems. Fourth, the President's budget invests in what we need to prepare for increasingly costly, devastating, and frequent natural disasters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has stepped up to meet this challenge, but the challenge is one that requires new resources. This budget invests $532 million above the fiscal year 2021 enacted level to help FEMA and its workforce combat the realities of climate change in an equitable way, including significant commitments to pre-disaster planning and climate resilience grant programs that benefit communities across the country. Finally, this budget invests necessary resources in one of our top priorities at the Department of Homeland Security, combating the growing threat of domestic violent extremism. Domestic terrorism is the most lethal and persistent terrorism-related threat to the United States today. That is why we are requesting $131 million to support innovative methods to prevent domestic terrorism while respecting privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. The funding also lifts up vital research on the root causes of radicalization, enhanced community outreach, and locally driven prevention efforts. It is one of the great honors of my life to serve alongside the dedicated public servants of the Department of Homeland Security. Their commitment to a complex and dynamic Homeland Security mission is unwavering, and I am committed to ensuring they are resourced, compensated, and recognized appropriately. I ask for your continued support and partnership in this effort. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to discussing the President's budget priorities for the department, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. As you know, this past year we've seen hackers target our water supply. The Chinese government has exploited vulnerabilities in Microsoft services. The Russian government conducts cyber espionage against dozens of federal agencies, and cyber criminals are attacking our critical infrastructure. This budget does contain a request for $2.1 billion for CISA, but could you please tell the committee why this figure is sufficient for us to deal with these attacks?
Thank you very much, Chairman. The budget recognizes the fact that cybersecurity is not only a matter of homeland security, but national security as well. And it invests in every dimension of our defense to this increasing threat to the homeland and to our country. It resources CISA to develop response teams that can assist not only federal government agencies across the enterprise, but state, local, tribal, and territorial partners, as well as, and critically, the private sector in understanding the threat, building their prevention capabilities, as well as their resilience should they be victimized by a cyber threat. It invests in our greatest resource of all, our human capital. We are underway in executing the largest cybersecurity hiring initiative in the department's history. We invest in technology and the capabilities that we have as a department to address this increasing threat. Technology, human resources, the human capital, the talent, and also increasing our footprint throughout the country so that we are present and more able and nimble to respond to events wherever they might occur and support our partners from border to border and sea to sea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, as you know, Canada will soon begin to reopen its border with the United States, allowing those who are fully vaccinated to cross the border. U.S. restrictions, however, remain essentially unchanged since the beginning of the pandemic, and those restrictions are hurting the cross-country communities in Michigan, as well as all along the northern border. So my question for you, Mr. Secretary, is what criteria are you using to inform the decisions on restricting cross-border travel with Canada?
Mr. Chairman, we are mindful of and monitoring every single day the economic impact of the travel restrictions. Our greatest priority is the health and safety of the American people. Just last week, I spoke with my counterpart in Canada, Minister Blair. I was aware of the measure that Canada would take, and we are watching the trajectory of the pandemic, a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We are watching the Delta variant very carefully, and we will lift those restrictions in collaboration with the Centers for Disease Control when the arc of the pandemic so warrants. This is a public health decision. We are mindful of the economic impacts, and we urge the American people who have not yet been vaccinated to get their vaccines. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated at this point.
Well, as you monitor this situation, Mr. Secretary, is it possible that the department will consider easing restrictions based on type of travel across the border from Canada? So, for example, will immediate relatives of U.S. citizens and green card holders soon be permitted to enter from Canada?
Mr. Chairman, we are looking at not only the economic impacts, but the other impacts on people's lives. The fact that families have not seen one another across the border. We are looking at all the different ways that we can compartmentalize the issue and see whether we can allow certain flows or ease certain restrictions in a limited way without imperiling the public health and safety of the American people, as well as the people of Canada. This is something that we're looking at very carefully and in many different ways. I commit to you to continue that close study on a daily basis.
Well, we appreciate that, and it does require that kind of daily look, I believe. So we look forward to continuing to work with you on this, Mr. Secretary. I can tell you the impact is significant in my state and other states on the northern border. Mr. Secretary, in 2020, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center found that cybercrime victims in Michigan saw a loss of nearly $84 million. And we know that malicious actors are increasingly relied on ransomware attacks to extort ransoms from these victims. I understand that early in your tenure at DHS, you launched a ransomware sprint to begin tackling this issue. So if you could please let this committee know how you're organizing the department to assist public and private entities to prevent and to respond to ransomware attacks.
Mr. Chairman, ransomware is one of the greatest cyber security threats that we face. We have seen a 300% increase in ransomware attacks over last year. We have seen more than $300 million in losses this year alone to ransomware. We are working in close coordination with our federal partners and the private sector to educate the private sector about the steps that they can take to best guard against a ransomware attack. In fact, not only did we start a ransomware sprint well before the Colonial Pipeline attack that galvanized the public attention for all the right reasons, but just last week we launched the stopransomware.gov website, the first of its kind, which is a one-stop clearinghouse for information related to ransomware. How businesses, small, medium, and large, how American residents, the American public, can protect themselves by backing up their systems, by changing their passwords. The blocking and tackling that is easy, accessible, and can really make a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ranking Member Portman, you are recognized for your questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, we've talked about this in our conversations, but as you know, I'm very concerned about the lack of investment in technology between our ports of entry, which is where obviously the vast majority of encounters are occurring. The DHS budget request for border security assets and infrastructure is $54 million, which is a deep reduction from the more than $1.5 billion funded for this last year. You're also asking us to rescind $1.9 billion in funds for border security. You know, over time, a lot of Democrats have said walls are not effective. The technology is what really is effective, and certainly if you have barriers, you have to have technology so that they can be more useful, because if people aren't doing the surveillance, then folks will go under, over, around the walls. And yet here we see a big cut in investments, tools like autonomous towers with cameras and sensors, the ground installation of sensors, which you and I saw when we were out there, badly needed. You know, with regard to the El Paso sector, as I recall, the actual fence is about 80 or 90% complete, and the final completion makes all the sense in the world. We've already paid for it. Otherwise, you have a huge problem for the Border Patrol protecting those openings. But what even was more shocking to me is that I was told only about 20% of the technology was completed. And on Inauguration Day, when the wall was halted, the so-called construction of the fence, that the technology was ended too. So I just don't get that. And I would wonder if you could give us an answer as to why you would want to reduce the amount of funding for technology between the ports of entry, and specifically as it relates to technology that could be contained with and make these fencing and other barriers more effective.
Ranking Member Portman, you and I have discussed this issue before. We appreciate this committee's support of its investments in our technology, which is in fact needed. We have proposed a budget that includes $655 million to modernize our ports of entry, as well as $54.3 million of investments in technology between the ports. I am looking at the projects, project by project. In fact, I just approved the implementation of technology with respect to 33 gates that were not previously operationalized. I also approved in the San Diego sector of our border the implementation of technology to complete that section of the border. And so, as I have mentioned before, and as I am committed, I am looking at project by project to understand the technological needs, the mission needs, and all aspects of the analysis. And I commit to continuing to do so.
With all due respect, you're not going to have any money to do that if you followed your own budget. And, you know, I know these budgets have to go through an OMB White House process, having been OMB director. But my gosh, I hope you will fight for more money for technology between the ports of entry. That's where the encounters are taking place. It's at record levels in terms of the illicit narcotics we've talked about, like fentanyl, the worst in over 2 decades, as you've acknowledged, with regard to migrants, and potentially about to get a lot worse with regard to your Title 42 decision. So, you know, from 54 million, you're not going to be able to do this. You had 1.5 billion funded last year, and you want to see us rescind an additional 1.9 billion. So you know, policy follows money, and in this case, you're not providing yourself with the tools you need to be able to allow the Border Patrol to do their job, and I know you know that. With regard to ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office, ICE numbers of arrests have dropped considerably as the borders have faced this surge. About a 58% decrease between the last administration and this administration. So I can't imagine what these ICE agents must be thinking. You know, they were told on Inauguration Day, you know, stop the deportations altogether. And now they're apparently being told not to arrest people. Otherwise, arrests would not be down almost 60% at a time when we have record numbers of people coming into our country. What signal do you think that sends to the traffickers, the human smugglers, and the potential unlawful migrants when there's such a dramatic decrease in internal enforcement by ICE?
Ranking Member Portman, I look forward to discussing with you the comments you made after I answered your first question. I have much to say in that regard, but let me answer the question with respect to the ICE agents that you've now posed, because it is absolutely not true that they have been told not to arrest people. What they are doing is smart and effective law enforcement. They are focusing on the threats to public safety, the threats to national security, the threats to border security, just like any responsible and intelligent law enforcement agency and office would do, just as we did in the United States Attorney's Office, of which I was a part for 12 years. In fact, just yesterday, we announced the results of Operation SOAR and arrested over time 300 individuals who had committed sex offenses that we felt were a public safety threat. We are focused on the people that pose the greatest risk to the safety of the American people. We are engaging in smart and effective enforcement. I have traveled around the country to meet with ICE personnel, to speak with them, to get their ideas about what those threats are, how they think their resources should be best dedicated. Later today, I'm speaking with leaders of that agency on that very same subject. We are dedicated to the protection of the American public in a smart and effective way, not
Mr. Secretary,
random.
thank you. I got limited time, as you know, and I want to respect my colleagues' time. 58% decrease in arrests at a time of unprecedented, at least the worst in over 2 decades, the numbers of people coming into the country. Let me just ask you this question. How many unlawful migrants have been removed from the United States so far this year by ICE enforcement and removal operations?
I would be very pleased to share that data with you and your staff. I don't have that figure in front of me, but let me just say this. When individuals are encountered at the border, single adults the majority of them are expelled under the Centers for Disease Control's Title 42 authority. And it's a public health authority held by the CDC. The majority are expelled, they are turned around. The others are placed into immigration enforcement proceedings. If they successfully make a claim for humanitarian relief under United States law, then as the law recognizes, they can stay. The others who are in immigration enforcement proceedings, if their claims for humanitarian relief failed, they are removed. And in fact, we are making reforms to increase the efficiency and expedition of that process that have never been made before and that are long overdue.
Mr. Secretary, my time has expired. As you know, I respect the fact that you spent time with the ICE officers. I respect the fact that you, I think, personally would like to see some changes, but I must respectfully say it's not true that they are removed. I don't think any children have yet been removed who came back in the last surge in 2019. I think a 58% decrease in arrests indicates a change in policy. I think that the question I asked about how many unlawful migrants have been removed so far this year is one that the response will be quite shocking to people because it will be incredibly low, very close to very few, maybe very few. And so We've been asking for this information for weeks. I appreciate the fact that today you've committed to getting us that information because I think the entire committee needs to see it. So again, thank you for your testimony today and for your service. And the unprecedented surge deserves a new approach, and I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Senator Padilla, I understand you need to preside over the Senate shortly. Senator Carper has agreed to defer to you for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Carper, as well. So I can do exactly that, participate in this hearing and fulfill my duty to preside over the Senate session. Also want to thank Secretary Mayorkas for his service and his leadership at this very challenging time for the Department of Homeland Security and better balancing the multiple objectives. Yes, maintaining safety and security at the border, or along the border, I should say, but also respecting our nation's asylum and humanitarian laws in the midst of a global health pandemic, which, the Delta variant is, causing us to, or reminding us that we're not out of the woods of the COVID-19 pandemic quite yet. But wanted to raise questions and issues on a different topic. Mr. Secretary, last month as chair of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety, I held a hearing on the subject of military naturalizations and deported veterans. We heard from veterans and advocates on how difficult it became under the Trump administration for military naturalizations to occur. We're talking about eligible immigrants. It became more difficult to go through the naturalization process, and we heard a number of heartbreaking stories of families torn apart because of harsh immigration laws and a more difficult process than necessary. I had a chance to meet some of the new citizens personally on July 1st when I spoke at a naturalization ceremony aboard the USS Iowa in Los Angeles. So I was pleased that shortly after the hearing, you made an announcement that the department was working with the Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Defense to ensure that veterans receive the benefits they deserve and those who have been deported might be able to come home again. My question is this. In the coming weeks, I understand that a number of reviews will be conducted on cases of deported veterans, and DHS will solicit feedback from stakeholders. Can you provide any more details on what resources, such as staffing or any interagency agreements, have been established to further this specific goal, and what the timeline is for reviewing the cases of deported veterans and their family members?
Senator Padilla, thank you for your kind words at the outset and also for your dedication to this issue, which is so important not only to the Department of Homeland Security, but to our country, that veterans are appropriately respected for their extraordinary service to us. Since we spoke about this first, we have indeed embarked upon a number of initiatives. Number one, to remove barriers to naturalization for those veterans who are eligible for that benefit, and two, to embark upon a concerted effort across the department to see that veterans who have been unjustly removed, unjustly deported from our country, can be returned. And just over the last few days, I selected a leader of this initiative within the Department of Homeland Security who's dedicated her career to this effort, and we are drawing upon the different agencies within DHS and across the government, and we are partnering with Secretary McDonough and the Veterans Affairs Administration to achieve this noble and imperative goal.
Okay. Thank you. I want to ask you a question on the subject of wildfires. California's 2020 wildfire season was the worst on record. We experienced 10,000 fire incidents, more than 4.2 million acres burned, and more than 10,000 structures damaged or destroyed. In 2021, there are already 7 large fires burning in California. It's only July. The largest of these fires, the Dixie Fire, has already burned nearly 200,000 acres, and as of yesterday was only 22% contained. FEMA, specifically Region 9, has been an excellent partner for California as we continue to weather these unprecedented disasters year after year. But now is the time for increased funding, support, and understanding for the unprecedented times that we're living in, particularly as we see the drought conditions in California. Mr. Secretary, what resources does the Department of Homeland Security need to ensure that FEMA is adequately supported so they're not just responsive to wildfires when they happen, but can also work with state and local partners in the off-season to support mitigation efforts to reduce the chance of devastating fires?
Senator, I had the opportunity to speak not only with Governor Newsom, but governors across the country in a bipartisan way at a summit hosted by President Biden on this very serious concern. We no longer have fire season in light of climate change. We are seeing fires year round, and our budget requests more grant funds for FEMA in support of its firefighting efforts, and that is critical. In addition, our Office of Science and Technology is working on innovative technology to best detect the probability that a fire will start within an approximate period of time and be able to assess the potential magnitude of that anticipated fire. We are using technology and we are seeking resources to fund our state and local tribal territorial partners. And our budget requests additional funding for this purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And just in closing, I mentioned your leadership and approach at the outset of my comments. Just three of the many concerns I'm sure you have to weigh: safety and security, of course, public health during a global health pandemic, respecting our nation's and international humanitarian and asylum laws, and more. Clearly, these are policies that are not mutually exclusive, but have to work well together. Any comments on your philosophy and your approach to this job?
Senator, our commitment is to be a nation of laws, laws of accountability, laws of humanitarian relief, to respect the dignity of the individual. And I think you put it so powerfully and aptly that these are not mutually exclusive of one another. And I appreciate that.
So, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start out by saying that under my chairmanship, it was rare where I didn't allow a second round of questioning. This is the second time that the Secretary has appeared before this committee. We have serious issues to discuss. This will be the second time that we won't be able to ask a second round of questions. I would hope the next time he appears and other administration officials appear before this committee, they'll afford the committee the respect we deserve in terms of oversight responsibility. So, Mr. Secretary, have a short period of time here, so I've got a lot of questions. I hope you keep your answers short and succinct. I appreciate the fact that we had a phone conversation yesterday and we went over some information, some numbers, but I just want you to confirm that based on that conversation, that the numbers I'm dealing with in terms of the extent of the crisis on the border are largely accurate. Through 6 months, January through June, total apprehensions are a little over 900,000. Is that correct?
I believe that is.
Okay.
As I mentioned yesterday in our call, I will provide you. I will provide you with accurate data when our respective teams meet.
Good. That compares to last year about 180,000. So it's about a 720,000 individual increase. It's about 400% increase on that.
That is
for the first 6 months. About 138,000 people have been released in the interior with a notice to appear. Is that about the right number?
As I mentioned yesterday, Senator Senator Johnson, I will provide you with the data.
So again, I will tell you what numbers I've got, and you can respond to me. Again, I don't have much time. according to Senator Langford's excellent report on the fact that we haven't completed this wall and it's costing us billions of dollars, in that report, he also stated there are about 35,000 individuals that have been released in the interior with just a notice to report. And he also states that only about 16%, a little over 5,000, have reported. So in total, in the first 6 months of this year, about 173,000 people have been released in the interior, and that compares to about 5,000 during the first 6 months of 2020, an enormous increase, 168,000 people more. So my question is, do you have any idea where those 173,000 people went? Do we keep track of that?
Senator, you are citing data with which I disagree. I will share the reasons why I disagree with.
Okay, good. So no matter what the number is, do we know where the people that have been released with either notice to appear or notice to report, do we know where they're going? Are we keeping track of it so that we can round them up if they don't appear?
I would use different language. Senator, yes, we do. And if in fact people flout our laws, we will exercise our enforcement authorities as the law provides.
So do we notify states and cities that we are releasing individuals into their jurisdictions?
There are times when we work very closely with state and local jurisdictions to coordinate.
Are there times when you don't?
Care of individuals.
Does every state, does every city know when you are sending a truckload or a busload or a few people into their city or into their jurisdiction with a notice to appear and notice to report?
We do not, and there are reasons for that under the law. And let me say
that's all I need to know. Okay, so let's talk some more numbers. So if we're at 173,000 people released in the interior for the first 6 months, if you multiply that times 2, that's 346,000 people. A recent report, and this is anecdotally as well, we're hearing that on average it's about 750 to 1,000 known gotaways per day. That's on top of the 6,300 apprehensions per day. So 750 to 1,000 known gotaways. We don't know how many unknown gotaways we've got, but 750 to 1,000 known gotaways per day. That translates to basically 269,000 people getting away, getting into the United States, and we have no idea who they are or where they're going. Is that roughly your understanding of that number as well?
No, it isn't. And
okay, so you can get so again, that's something else you need to report back to me on. So again, this is information I've got. So if you add up those two numbers, doubling the 6 months, people with notices to appear, notices to report, 346,000 plus 269, that's over 600,000 people coming to this country, either being apprehended and dispersed, or just because we're so overwhelming CBP that they're able to get in this country, get away, and nobody knows who they are. Over 600,000 people. Just to put that in perspective, that's larger than the population of Wyoming. It's approaching the population of Vermont. That is the extent of the problem that, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, you and this administration are denying. You are in a state of denial in terms of the crisis. You said that you're going to defend against dangerous threats. You got 269,000 people. You don't know who they are. You know, my guess, many of them might be drug traffickers, members of transnational criminal organizations, gang members. But let's talk about the murders and the deaths occurring in our inner cities. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you: Are you aware that the human traffickers sell children so they can create a family unit that can exploit our asylum laws? Are you aware that happens?
Senator,
yes or no? Are you aware that happens?
Will you give me an opportunity?
No. I want my questions answered. Are you aware that human traffickers sell children to create a family unit?
Your articulation of what occurs at the border is inaccurate.
Well, then give us better information, because we're not getting it.
Your
Are,
assertion,
are you
your
aware of how many
assertion-
people, how many of these young girls are raped on their way and being abused by these human traffickers? Are you aware of that happening? Are you aware of how many
of
people
course-
are you investigating the people that are being engaged and being forced into the sex trade? And
Of course we are.
Of human in servitude,
Of course we are, Senator.
involuntary servitude.
Of course we are. And when an individual who suffers that victimization at the hands of criminals comes to our border and makes a claim for humanitarian relief under United States law, we consider those claims for relief under United States law. That's what we do with respect to those tragic cases.
Mr. Secretary, again, I have
do.
so many questions. I've run out of time. I hope next time you come and you actually will stay for second and third and maybe fourth rounds of questions, because the American people deserve transparency. They deserve accountability. They need to understand this enormous, tragic crisis on our border. And right now, because the mainstream media is not reporting it, and your administration isn't even admitting we have a crisis on the border, the American people are basically in the dark of what's happening here. It's a tragedy. It's a travesty.
Senator, the next time I testify before this committee, I do hope that I'll have the opportunity to provide answers, to explain the laws of the United States, to explain how we're executing those laws, to explain the plan that we have.
I would be satisfied with basic facts and numbers that we're not getting, because the facts and the numbers will describe what's happening. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're not being provided that information. So please give us the information, and not necessarily just in a hearing, on an annual or on an ongoing basis, daily, weekly. Give us that information.
I will, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Senator Hessen, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and the ranking member not only for this hearing, but for sharing your own thoughts and sympathies to the Enzi family today. Mike Enzi was a valued colleague and friend, and he will be deeply and sorely missed. I also want to thank the Secretary for being here today. And Mr. Secretary, I do have a number of questions for you, but I wonder if you would like a minute or so to respond to anything that Senator Johnson did not give you an opportunity to respond to just now.
Senator, thank you for that opportunity. Let me be brief. Individuals whom we encounter at the border, some of them are expelled under Title 42, which is a Centers for Disease Control public health authority. It is not an authority of the Department of Homeland Security. Those who are not expelled under that public health law are actually placed into immigration enforcement proceedings under United States law, where they can make a claim for humanitarian relief under our laws. If their claim is found to be valid, they are entitled to stay under the law. If their claim is not found to be valid, they are removed from the United States, again, consistent with United States law. We have a plan underway to address the surge of migrants at the border, a surge that began in April of last year. It is a periodic surge that we have encountered for many, many years in the absence of immigration reform and the opportunity to fix our immigration system once and for all. But we are using the authorities that we have wisely and also in unprecedented ways to rebuild our immigration system after its dismantling in the prior administration. And we are making and taking measures that have not been taken before, that are long overdue, and we're doing whatever we can within our authorities, and we hope that Congress will act as well. That is the fundamental change that is needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Now, on to my questions. I was encouraged to see that U.S. Customs and Border Protection's budget included a $14 million increase for the National Vetting Center's budget, which will allow the center to expand vetting capabilities. I was disappointed, though, that the department's budget does not include any additional funding to continue expanding the Visa Security Program. I strongly support the Visa Security Program because it allows DHS to interview and vet individuals long before they arrive in the United States. So, Mr. Secretary, the department's budget request is an opportunity for it to expand and integrate its critically important screening and vetting programs in a thoughtful way. How will the department continue to do that using programs like the National Vetting Center and the Visa Security Program?
Senator, I appreciate your concerns with respect to the Visa Security Program, and I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you further about it and discuss our budget request in that regard. We are looking very carefully not only at the vetting process and eyes on data, but also how we can use data analytics and new technology to create greater efficiencies and actually save money while advancing our security obligations. And so I do look forward to speaking with you further about the concerns that you have, that we share, and how we are addressing them most effectively.
Thank you. I would look forward to that as well. Now I want to turn to a topic that Senator Peters also raised, because I was pleased that last week the Canadian government announced that it would permit vaccinated Americans to travel to and from Canada beginning on August 9th. But I am disappointed, as Senator Peters is, that the Department of Homeland Security announced that U.S. borders would remain closed even to vaccinated Canadians for another month. This border closure continues to impact families and local economies in New Hampshire and all around the country, and I appreciate, too, that in your testimony just now you recognize that. But given that the Canadian vaccination rate recently surpassed the rate we have here in the United States, what is the department's rationale for extending the restrictions?
So if I may, Senator, as I mentioned in response to Chairman Peters' question, I spoke with Minister Blair of Canada about this, and he was aware, because we communicate very closely and coordinate, he was aware that I would be issuing the renewal of our Title 19 authority to restrict travel between our countries. But one thing that renewal articulates is very important, and that is that though the renewal of the travel restrictions is in effect for another 30 days, should the public health enable us to lift travel restrictions in any way before the expiration of that 30-day period, we do have the authority to do so. And what we are doing is looking at it on a day-to-day basis, understanding the concerns that the chairman expressed and that you have echoed now.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm going to interrupt you here just in the interest of time. I'm going to urge you, though, to not extend the border closure any longer than it already has been. And you've talked about some of the steps that the department is taking to ensure that you're making the analysis correctly. I don't understand the public health analysis given the Canadian vaccination rates, and given that they're just allowing vaccinated Americans in, we could do the same reciprocally. I would urge you to take the steps you need to be prepared to open the border to vaccinated Canadians as quickly as you can. Let me move on to one more topic, though, before my time expires. The opioid epidemic continues to ravage communities in New Hampshire and all across the United States. DHS is focused on disrupting and dismantling international drug trafficking organizations. Unfortunately, those organizations have also shown themselves able to adapt and exploit the predictable procedures at U.S. borders. For example, drug trafficking organizations use pedestrian border crossings, concealing drugs on many people, knowing that CBP doesn't have the ability to intercept more than a fraction of those drugs. These organizations also smuggle money and guns out of the United States to exploit CBP's minimal outbound screening. So, Mr. Secretary, what's the department doing to deploy new technologies and procedures to increase detection capabilities? And are there additional resources or technologies that DHS needs at the border that can stop drug trafficking organizations from smuggling drugs into the U.S.?
Senator, this is a very, very important question. I respectfully request an opportunity to answer it. The scourge of drugs in the United States has been a problem for many, many years. In fact, in 2020, last year, saw a 30% increase in fentanyl overdoses in the United States over the year prior, over 2019. We are very focused on this. Not only are we continuing to invest in technology at our borders and border modernization, because interestingly and importantly, the narco traffickers seek to move the greatest amount of drugs through the ports of entry, and that is where our apprehension efforts are also focused, as well as in between the ports of entry and by air and by sea. But we are investing in technology, and we are developing strategies, investigative and prosecution strategies, to attack the narco traffickers. Operation Sentinel, which is a concerted effort across our department, a new effort, is focused on following the money and tearing down the infrastructure of these criminal organizations. We are doing a lot across the board, and I'd be very pleased to provide further details to you and your staff at the earliest possible opportunity for you.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the Chair's indulgence in letting me go over time. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
First, thank you, Chairman Peters. First, my heart goes out to the Enzi family, to Diana and the children, the grandchildren. It's tragic what happened to Mike. What a wonderful person, and what a great senator, and he's a mentor to a lot of people. So, Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm really surprised and actually disappointed that you've not been more vocal about what's going on in Cuba. I can show you a couple. You probably know this, but these are pictures of protesters being mistreated by the Castro regime. We know that over 500 dissidents have been detained and they're being tortured. I met with one of the families yesterday, and I think you have a role as Secretary of DHS to be more vocal on this, and I'm disappointed you haven't. The Biden administration has blamed root causes like poverty, violence, and climate change in Central America for the border crisis. You said in a statement released by DHS March 16th regarding the situation at the southwest border that the United States needs an all-of-government effort to not only address the current situation on our southwest border, but to institute longer-term solutions to irregular migration from countries in our hemisphere that are suffering worsening conditions. On May 7th, you went to Daca, Texas, where you said we must secure the southwest border by addressing the root causes of migration. Then you were here on May 13th, and you said the most sustainable solutions to our challenge at the border include addressing the root causes that drive people to migrate in the first place. Root causes, I think we can all agree, refer to instability in Latin America and the dangerous and ruthless dictatorships that perpetuate oppression and force their citizens to flee in search of a better life. If we think about root causes, we have to also talk about Cuba. Cuba is the root of instability in Latin America. According to Southcom, the three nations most receptive to malign influence that open the door to bad actors in the Western Hemisphere are Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. On May 21st, Secretary Blinken renewed a Trump administration decision classifying Cuba as a country that is failing to cooperate with U.S. anti-terrorism efforts, certifying it a state sponsor of terrorism. The Biden administration cannot tackle the root causes of instability and violence in our hemisphere by neglecting the real threats of regimes like in communist Cuba. Cuba props up other anti-democratic regimes like Ortega's Nicaragua and Maduro's narco state of Venezuela that incite disorder, instability, corruption, and unrest across the region. Cuba supports drug and weapons trafficking and transnational criminal organizations. Totalitarian dictatorships like these in our backyard only multiply our regional security challenges and hinder any change toward democracy. Communist Cuba is a threat to our national security and a horrible human rights violator. The Cuban people are suffering. I've talked to families all across Florida. They're talking about the atrocities that are happening to peaceful protesters. Their children are being taken to serve in the military. And I know dissidents and their families, and these dissidents have been arrested and detained, and they know they're being tortured, but they have no idea where they are. I met with Jose Daniel Ferrer's brother, sister, and daughter yesterday, and they have no idea what's happening to him right now. So first, Secretary Mayorkas, do you agree that the illegitimate communist regime in Cuba is a major cause of the instability in Latin America, helps drive the violence and illegal activity that causes these families to flee their countries, and is a threat to our U.S. national security?
Senator, as you'll be able to hear, there's a fire alarm in the Department of Homeland Security's building in which I am currently resident. I did hear your question. I hope you can hear what I am saying, and then I will need to step out for a minute, and I'm very, very sorry for that. I will take to heart your comment that I need to be more vocal about what is going on in Cuba. I did speak publicly about that, and of course, our president, our Secretary of State, the president's national security advisor, has spoken very powerfully on this subject as well. It is something of tremendous personal importance to me. My family lost everything as a result of the communist takeover of Cuba. The authoritarian regime in Cuba is responsible for the repression of the Cuban people, and we stand with the Cuban people. I'm afraid I'm going to have to step out, and I will return as quickly as I possibly can. I'm so very sorry.
That's all right, Mr. Secretary. We'll take a brief recess until we assess the situation at the Secretary's location. Senator Scott, you still have 2 minutes left for your question when we come back. Thanks. The committee will come back to order. It's good to see you back, Mr. Secretary, and safe and sound. We'll continue with the hearing. Senator Scott, you're recognized for the remainder of your time for your questions.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, if I may say one thing very briefly without imposing upon the senator's time, because I'm not sure whether what I articulated came through during the fire alarm, and I apologize for the interruption to this hearing. Senator Scott, first, I appreciate your defense of the Cuban people and your articulation of that so powerfully and consistently. Secondly, I will take stock of what you said, urging me to be even more vocal about the situation in Cuba. As you know, this is something profoundly personal to me. I was born in Cuba, and my parents brought me here as refugees, fleeing the communist takeover of Cuba. And my father lost his business, the place of his birth, where he thought he would raise his family, even the opportunity to lay his mother to rest. I join you condemning the authoritarian regime in Cuba and its repression of the people of Cuba. And I echo yours and the President's and our Secretary of State's and the President's National Security Advisor's condemnation of the actions of the authoritarian regime in Cuba. And we stand very strongly with the people of Cuba. And the measures this administration has taken powerfully evidence that.
Thank you, Secretary. Do you believe the administration is doing enough to focus on? I mean, Cuba's the root cause of all the problems. You can look at this. Look at the problems. You know, Maduro's completely supported by the Castro regime. Ortega's completely supported by the Castro regime, and so a lot of the problems we're seeing down there is caused by Cuba, and I just don't see that the administration is doing enough to say this is the root cause of the problem. Let's figure out how to stop this.
Senator, I think the sanctions that were recently imposed are a strong measure, and we are, of course, across the administration monitoring the situation in Cuba, and we'll take the measures that our foreign policy and are led by our president think most prudent in the interest of the American people and in defense of the Cuban people.
Thank you, sir. So, yeah, as you know, in the past, what Cuba's done is to release the pressure. They've allowed people to leave. How will the Biden administration deal with a mass deportation by the Castro regime?
Senator, the laws that address a mass migration from Cuba, not only from Cuba, from Haiti as well, speak to the fact that that perilous journey should not be taken, that individuals will be interdicted, and if they make claims for relief, they will be taken elsewhere, not to the United States, but elsewhere for a referral, for resettlement in safe third countries.
Is that consistent with what's going on at the southern border? Is that what's happening there? Because my understanding, if you leave Cuba, you're clearly leaving. You're probably going to seek asylum, and you probably rightfully should be able to seek asylum. So is that the same thing that's happening on the southern border? Is that the same process?
Senator, it is slightly different for reasons of history and law, and actually in the interest of the security of the people who attempt. We cannot say this strongly enough, that people should not take to the seas. Tragically, we have recovered more than 20 individuals who died taking that dangerous journey. That is an incredibly important message of humanity, to not take to the seas.
I think this is a historic time, and I hope the Biden administration will be more aggressive. I hope in your role as Secretary of Homeland Security, you will be more aggressive. This is our opportunity to stop the Cuban regime and do so much to create stability in Latin America. And so I hope you and the Biden administration will do everything you can to stop the Castro regime right now. The Cuban people have risen up. We've got to do everything we can to help them. We've got to get internet back on. We've got to speak about it. We've got to talk about the atrocities. And if we do, I believe we're going to see democracy and freedom in Cuba. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Rosen, you are recognized for your question.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and Secretary Mayorkas. Thank you for being here today. I hope everything's okay in your building. But I have many questions about the DHS budget. I'm only going to have time for a few of them, so I'll submit most of them for the record. But first, I want to talk about the Daca program. As you know, Daca and TPS have provided critical protections for thousands of Nevadans. Unfortunately, as you're also aware, a Texas federal judge ruled just 2 weeks ago that the Daca program is unconstitutional. It's halting the approval of new Daca applications. It's leaving aspiring dreamers vulnerable and uncertain about their futures. The situation is an example of why it's just crucial that we immediately pass immigration reform through any means, including the budget reconciliation process. Secretary Mayorkas, how is this court ruling impacting DACA applications that were submitted prior to the court's misguided ruling? And what can the administration do to help individuals who have already submitted their applications and were not processed before July 16th today?
Senator, thank you very much for your question. As I think you know, I was the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It was that incredible agency that I led in the implementation of DACA. I cannot overstate the importance of passing legislation to bring stability to individuals, the youth who qualify for DACA. That is a permanent solution and one that will resonate across the country. The DACA program is so very popular with the American people for all the right reasons. We are not able to process new applications for DACA or continue with applications filed in light of the judge's ruling. We are continuing to litigate that case, and within the bounds of the law and within the bounds of the judge's ruling, we are seeking to fortify the DACA program. But there is no substitute for the permanent solution that Congress can deliver.
Thank you. And I'll take, if you could provide these sometime later, can you provide in writing the updated number of the DACA applications that were pending on or before that day of that ruling, please? So we just have an idea of how many are there. And I know there's a lot of biometric appointments that have been canceled. And so we'll take some of those. We're going to submit some questions. We have specific questions about that. We'll submit that off the record as well. I'd like to move on to talk about our nonprofit security grant program, because over the past few years, we've seen dangerous increase in threats and attacks on at-risk communities, including the deadliest attack against the Jewish community in modern American history at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. To protect the houses of worship and other nonprofits against terrorist attacks, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program makes FEMA grants available to eligible nonprofit organizations for all kinds of security enhancements. Reflecting the growing threat to nonprofit institutions, demand for grants, of course, has far outpaced their availability. But in fiscal year 2022, in your DHS budget, you failed to request specific funding for the nonprofit security grant. Do you agree that the funding should be increased to meet the growing needs, and what can we do about this? Because I think we know that empowering communities at the local level really makes a difference in keeping everyone safe.
Senator, I look forward to speaking with you further and working with you in connection with the 2022 budget, because the Nonprofit Security Grant Program is in fact so important, and especially now, tragically, when we've seen a tremendous rise in hate crimes affecting the Jewish community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, the Muslim American community, and other minority communities, all of whom I have engaged with extensively during my short tenure thus far in light of the growing threat. So I very much look forward to working with you.
Yes, I agree with you. That was my follow-up. We have a lot of other communities that are also experiencing hate crimes, violence against them, whether they're in suburban, urban, or rural areas. And so I think this grant program, fortifying it's particularly important. I'd like to move on in just the few minutes I have left to talk about ICE detention and your resource management, because your ICE's long-term fiscal mismanagement, of course, it's a major concern for all of us. The president's DHS budget requests $8.4 billion for ICE. It's a slight increase, but an increase nonetheless. And so during the last administration, ICE received enormous budget increases solely for detention and deportation with little accountability. For years, ICE has blown through its budget, come back to Congress for more funding, it's received the funding, and there's a lot of budget overruns. And on top of that, DHS has even transferred funds into ICE from other agencies, including FEMA, which has a critical mission of protecting Americans before and after the wake of disasters. We have wildfires all throughout my state in the West, and of course, natural disasters all around the country. So can you tell us, please, how you will address such financial mismanagement, bring that ICE on a more stable funding track and clean up the mismanagement of funds?
So if I may, Senator, I recognize the issue and am well aware of the issue that you have focused upon in this last question. I am meeting regularly with ICE with respect to fiscal responsibility, as is the Deputy Secretary, as is our Chief Financial Officer. Importantly, when it comes to detention, we are reviewing the detention architecture within ICE across the board in collaboration with our Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and our relatively newly created Office of the Detention Ombudsman in the Department of Homeland Security. I think it is very noteworthy that we closed 2 facilities because of the substandard conditions maintained in those facilities. And that's a first of its kind and a very important message, not only with respect to our fiscal responsibility, but our responsibility to our values and the dignity of each individual.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because we do have to remember the dignity of each individual is so important. Thank you for your time. My time is up, Chair Peters.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, could I just take a moment before I ask my questions to say just a quick word about our colleague, Mike Enzi? Could I do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember when I was new in the Senate and presiding over the Senate, and Mike Enzi got recognition and started speaking. He started talking about how he and Ted Kennedy worked so well together. That's and on the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, they did a remarkable job of working together. And he said during his comments on the floor that day, he talked about the 80-20 rule. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I've heard the 80-20 rule discussed in other contexts, but I wasn't sure what he was talking about. Before he finished, I gave a note to one of the pages that said, ask Mr. Senator Enzi to come and talk to me before he leaves the floor. And he did. And I said, what's the 80-20 rule? And he said, Ted and I agree on 80% of the stuff before our committee. He said, we disagree on maybe 20%. And what we've decided to do is to focus on the 80% where we agree and come back and focus on the 20% some other day. And he says it works. And as we mourn his loss and his passing and trying to work our way through this discussion and debate on infrastructure and other related issues, I think just a nod to Mike Enzi and a reflection on the 80-20 rule, to say maybe that's something we could pull off the shelf and put to good use in the days to come. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much. If I could now, colleagues and Mr. Secretary, welcome, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for your leadership and for joining us today. But I don't normally ask yes or no questions, but I'm going to ask a couple of you today. But given the nearly $14.6 billion budget request for CBP alone, do you believe the Senate needs to move quickly on confirming President Biden's nominee to lead this vital agency? Just yes or no?
Yes.
In order to curb the influx of migration we see every year at our southwestern border, do you believe that we need to address the root causes of migration from countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And my last yes or no question for the morning: the budget request, your budget requests about $1.2 billion for investments in modernizing ports of entry, border security, and technology. Will this amount of money improve our ability to counter fentanyl and other illicit drugs coming through our ports?
Yes, it will, Senator.
Thanks very much. I'm going to change gears now and talk about St. Elizabeth's, if we could, something we've talked about before. I understand that the National Capital Planning Commission recently approved final plans for the new Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, affectionately known as CISA, headquarters at St. Elizabeth's campus. Our GSA estimates that the consolidation of DHS component agencies at St. Elizabeth's will save more than $474 million over the next 30 years, compared to leasing spaces for these agencies over that same time, $474 billion over 30 years. Mr. Secretary, could you please take a moment to provide an expected timeline for completion of the new CISA headquarters there, and talk about how the larger consolidation project improves the department's mission effectiveness and saves taxpayer dollars, please?
Senator, I will need to get back to you on the precise timeline for the development of the CISA residence at the St. Elizabeth's headquarters. I cannot overstate the importance of geographic proximity in facilitating greater cohesion within our department. As a matter of fact, not only am I so supportive of the St. Elizabeth's project that began a number of years ago, but we're looking at our footprint across the country and exploring how we can actually co-locate agencies in various cities as leases expire, not only to save money, but really to provoke greater collaboration between and among the different agencies and offices of our department. That's one of our areas of focus.
All right, thank you for that response. Let me turn and now to raise a question or two regarding how the improvement of key management functions at the Department of Homeland Security. In its most recent 2021 high-risk list report, the GAO, Governmental Accountability Office, identified several key management functions at the Department of Homeland Security's high-risk areas, including information technology, including budget and financial management, including procurement and acquisition, and including human capital management. My question, Mr. Secretary, could you take a moment to discuss with us today how the budget you submitted reflects the progress made, as well as other challenges faced in implementing the department's integrated strategy for high-risk management, which includes, I believe, goals, includes correction, the corrective activities, actions plans that address GAO's outcomes in these key management functions, please.
Senator, as I think you know, tackling the issues on the high-risk list was one of my greatest priorities when I served as the Deputy Secretary.
I do know that. I remember that clearly.
I had the privilege of working with Gene Dodaro and his terrific team at GAO. In fact, I met with Mr. Dodaro and his terrific team. That was one of the first things I did when I became the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, that's great. That's great news.
And our efforts continue to be led by the incredible Jim Crumpacker, who coordinates all our efforts. And I would look forward to speaking with you further about how this budget addresses the remaining issues on the high-risk list, some of which can be tackled in short order, and some of which are frankly enduring challenges that we continue to work on.
All right, thank you. Mr. Secretary, we thank you for your testimony today. I'd ask, you know how I have a great affection for the people of the department that you lead. Just convey our thanks to all of your people for what they do day in and day out to secure our homeland. And wrapping up, I got about a minute and 45 seconds left. Let me just ask, before my time runs out here, are there any issues that you might want to take this minute and a half to address issues raised by some of my colleagues today that you'd like to elaborate on or maybe provide some clarification?
Well, Senator, I appreciate that question. I look forward to the opportunity to explaining the fact that we as an administration, and specifically the Department of Homeland Security, has a comprehensive plan to address migration that we encounter at the border. And it is a comprehensive plan that addresses the root causes, which is the bottom line. And it is unfortunate that over the past 4 years, investments in addressing those root causes were so significantly slashed. We are developing safe and legal pathways for individuals to avail themselves of our humanitarian laws that Congress has passed so that they do not need to take the dangerous journey, imperil their lives, and reach our border. And we are bringing greater efficiency and program improvements to border processing and to our immigration enforcement architecture. Just yesterday, we announced the commencement of expedited removal to bring greater speed without compromising due process to processes that take far too long. And we continue to work in that effort. We have a plan in collaboration with other countries south of our border. We are investing in root causes. We are developing legal pathways, and we are improving our immigration system. But we do need at the same time, Senator, Congress to act. There is unanimity that our immigration system is broken, and we need it fixed through legislation. And I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, well said. Thank you so much. Thanks for your service. Thanks for your leadership. Our best to you and your family.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Romney, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to join you and Senator Carper and others who've expressed condolences and great sadness at the loss of our former colleague, Senator Enzi, a wonderful man and a wonderful friend. Let me express appreciation to the chairman for joining us today. I was a little troubled by the lack of information that Senator Johnson described. Secretary, are you willing to commit that you will provide the data that Senator Johnson asked for? Is that something you can and will provide? And can you tell us when that would be available to the committee?
Yes, I commit to providing that information, that data, Senator, and we will provide it as quickly as possible.
I would presume that would be within the next 30 days then?
Oh, there should be no problem in doing so, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you. Obviously, one of the key responsibilities of Homeland Security is to secure our border, securing our homeland, if you will. And the numbers and the human stories that are coming from our border are both alarming and obviously threatening to our domestic tranquility and safety and economic vitality. I don't know exactly why the administration doesn't want to acknowledge the crisis that we're seeing at the border. And I guess the real question in my mind is why we politicize everything. I mean, you know, I'm one of those that's critical of people who politicize vaccination. But I'm also incredulous that there seems to be politicization about whether we should complete the border barrier that's already been contracted to be completed. There are gaps in it. The steel is there. The contracts have been let. Contractors, as Senator Langford has pointed out, are standing by guarding the steel. Why in the world don't we complete, you know, the barrier that's already been contracted for? Surely it would help our security of the border. I simply don't understand. And is there a reason that we're not completing it? The idea was, well, we're going to study that. It's been 6 months. Businesses are able to make major decisions on acquisitions and so forth in a lot faster time frame than that. We came up with a vaccine. Heavens, I mean, why can't we make this decision and proceed?
Senator, I know that we will not agree on this issue, but the decision with respect to the border wall was not a political decision, but a substantive one. That the $15 billion that was dedicated to construction of the border wall was ill-advised, and we can use the government's funds and taxpayers' funds more wisely through investment in innovation, through investment in technology, that is the greatest force multiplier.
Mr. Secretary, the great majority of that money has already been spent. The overwhelming majority, and now there's some gaps in what's already been spent. The prior administration, the one before, President Obama's administration, expanded the border barrier. I mean, I'm all in favor of technology, but as long as we've already paid for and have contracts to complete the wall, I simply can't understand any logical reason not to complete it. Look, I'm not a severe partisan that's going to attack Democrats on every corner. But this just strikes me as being nonsense. I simply can't understand it. And with regards to the comment that we're going to invest in root causes, I don't understand what you're referring to there. Are you suggesting that somehow we should be able to invest to make sure that all of Latin America gets rid of their dictators, gets rid of their corruption, ends violence? And if we do that, maybe there'll be less people trying to get to the border. That's unrealistic. That's of course absurd. We can't do all those things even domestically, let alone around the world. People want to come to this country. They always will. You're responsible for securing our border. I just don't get why you don't address this in a way, well, frankly, like President Obama did. Complete the barrier, use technology, have ICE carry out the responsibility of removing people that are here illegally. I noticed that the House Democrats recently approved plans to slash the budget for enforcement and removal operations. They cut it by hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that a mistake? And do you believe that those funds should be restored?
Senator, you've mentioned three different subjects. I will move very quickly through the three of them.
I didn't ask for a response to some of them. Those were my comments. The response I wanted was, do you believe in restoring and not cutting the funding for enforcement and removal operations, contrary to what the House has passed?
I believe in smart and effective immigration enforcement, and that is what we are executing. And I do not believe in spending taxpayer money unwisely and not consistent with enforcement priorities that are designed to achieve the greatest public safety
of course,
objective.
I agree with motherhood and apple pie as well, but the House has voted to reduce spending on enforcement. Is that something with which you concur, or do you believe that would be a mistake, and therefore you want to make sure that we don't reduce spending on enforcement?
What I am focused on is the wise expenditure of funds, and I have a responsibility.
And given that focus on the wise expenditure of funds, do you believe we should cut the funding for enforcement, or do you believe we should maintain it or increase it?
In certain respects, I think we should increase it. In other respects, I think we should reduce it. And because some of it is not spent wisely to achieve the most important outcomes. And I've seen that, Senator, if I may, because I know you disagree with me by your physical reaction, but if I may, I know that from being in the trenches and actually doing the work.
Look, of course, I asked a simple question. Do you think that the budget should be reduced or not? And you respond like a politician. What can I say? I'm a politician too. Let me take a different topic altogether in my remaining moments. The federal government is spending as much on interest right now as we spend on the combined budgets of Commerce, Education, Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, the Justice Department, and the State Department. Let that sink in. That overspending is contributing to the highest level of inflation we've seen in some 12 years. Would you say that trillion-dollar deficits like these, before the pandemic as well as after the pandemic, that they pose a threat to our national security?
Senator, that's a question that I am ill-equipped to answer. That is not my area of expertise.
Well, you have an opinion, I'm sure. I mean, and you're head of the Department of Homeland Security. The question I'm asking is, are we reaching a point where the level of our debt and deficits and the interest we're paying represent a threat to our Homeland Security?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
At no level, trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, that doesn't pose a threat to our national security?
I believe that this administration's efforts to rebuild this country, contribute to the security of this country, its national security, and its homeland security, its economic security, and its possibilities and promise.
That's an answer to a question I didn't ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Chair recognizes Senator Langford for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again. Thanks for our phone calls in the previous week and for the letters. I've sent over a letter request to you, some specific details and facts and figures. Can you give us just an update on when we might get some of the answers to some of those questions and some of the facts and figures I've continued to be able to ask for?
Senator, I know that is, and thank you. I appreciated our discussion a great deal. I need to follow up since our conversation to provide you with a definite timetable. I know it's pressing, and we need to deliver that to you forthwith. So I will follow up later today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Obviously, you know that I've been pretty outspoken and try to get some of these facts and figures that are not unrealistic for the Oversight Committee to be able to get access to these numbers, regardless of party. We have a responsibility to be able to go through these facts and figures. You and I also had a conversation briefly about TSA and about some of the pipeline decisions they've made on interim regulatory decisions. My request to you was obviously to get communication back and forth with some of the pipeline companies and to be able to get notice and comment. They have some interim guidance out there. I have had some assurances from you that there will be some notice and comment and some time for the companies to be able to actually contribute some insight, based on the simple fact that some of the statements that were required of them will take a very long time to be able to actually accomplish. And for just a simple instance, some of the things that they're being asked to do and to prove, they've already done, but it looks like they're being asked to do it again just because of a new guidance. So is there notice and comment time coming for that, for TSA?
Yes, that is indeed the plan. That remains the plan. I appreciated your feedback in our prior conversation with respect to the private sector companies that are subject to TSA's action, and I've begun to follow up already on that.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Let's talk about the border wall, this fencing, which is really a system that's in place. The fence is the most prominent, noticeable portion of that. It includes the fence. It includes a road for patrol. It includes fiber to do ground detection for movement. It includes cameras. It includes lighting. When that stopped in construction for all of those phases on January the 20th, there was ordered a 60-day study. Can you tell us the status of that study? Because it's been about 200 days since that was done. Is that a study that we could get access to? Is it complete?
That study is ongoing, but we are going project by project, Senator. And in fact, in the San Diego sector, for example, of the border, I just approved the application of technology to make 33 gates operational, and approved other things in the San Diego sector. We're going project by project, and I'd be very pleased to provide you with an update on that.
That'd be very helpful. In the Rio Grande Valley sector, which last week alone had 20,000 encounters with people illegally crossing the border just last week. In that sector, it's another sector where the gates are installed, but just the power has been cut off to them. And as of January the 20th, they can't open and close gates. Literally, farmers that the fence in some areas cross across their fields can't access both parts of it. They've got to go the long way around. So the challenge is, while you're identifying that in one sector in California and in Texas, they have the exact same issue, yet they're not able to access their fields because the power has not been turned on. You've got other areas where all of the fence is done except for the gates have not been hung, and those are areas where apparently contractors have been hired to be able to watch the steel in the ground rather than actually install it. I think there's some common sense to this as well that doesn't require 200 days of study to say we're going to be able to put the gates up. We're going to put power to the gates so we can actually open and close them. We're going to do roads around so the Border Patrol can actually do patrol. So I would encourage the completion of that, not to mention the fact $2 billion has already been spent of the $10 billion that was allocated to it, not to build the fencing itself. And so we're now down 20% of the funding for whatever decision is going to be made on that. That's obviously a serious fiscal issue in the days ahead.
Senator, if I may, I'm not
Sure.
familiar with that figure, but let me say that The study involves a number of different aspects. For example, adverse environmental impacts that people in those communities have complained of deeply, as well as private landowners' complaints about the taking of their property by eminent domain to construct a border wall. So the review that we're undertaking is comprehensive, taking into consideration landowners' concerns as well. And we're very mindful, of course, of the challenge in the RGV and very focused on it.
Is it your assumption that at some point that your study may come back and say you want to take parts of the wall down based on landowner comments?
I haven't crossed that issue just yet. If in fact there's that consideration, I certainly would be willing and eager to engage with you on it.
I think that would be a dreadful mistake in the process to be able to have $1 billion that's spent, and we can have a conversation about that. But let me talk about the interim ICE guidance.
I haven't encountered that. I have not encountered that yet, Senator.
Terrific. Hopefully it's not encountered. We have ICE agents that have interim guidance that's been given to them. My understanding is, as far as their detention or deportation or arrest of an individual that's currently inside the United States. Now, you set priorities for them of if they have crossed illegally across the border during the last, now it is 8 months. If they're a person that has said that they had a notice to appear somewhere, a notice to report, I should say, of this 35,000, but yet they actually didn't report in, they exceeded their time period that they were allotted to be able to turn in, or if they're a criminal alien. That seemed to be the guidance that you gave out for individuals. So when is the final guidance for ICE and actually how they're going to operate? When is that coming?
So the three priority areas are national security, public safety, and border security. Border security includes recent border crossers that are not honoring their legal obligations to appear in court in immigration proceedings. We file immigration enforcement proceedings with respect to individuals who claim relief at the border, those who are not expelled under Title 42. I have been traveling around the country and engaging with the ICE workforce as I develop the enforcement guidelines. My hope is to issue those guidelines in mid-October. I'm sorry, mid-August. Mid-August, I apologize.
Mid-August, okay. Mr. Chairman, could I have you to have one minute, a follow-up question?
Yes, without objection.
Thank you. We've tried to interact and be able to determine all the criminal alien portion. I know there's been a significant change in that. One of the cases that came out, and we have multiples of them, I can share any of these with you, but one of the cases, it's a recent one, was there's an individual, previously deported alien. He had a conviction for sexual assault of a minor under 14 years of age. Alien was at large. ICE officers requested permission to target that subject, and the request was denied by ICE management under the new guidelines. It's there. Second case, previously deported alien, conviction for indecency with a child under 5 years of age. That was a registered sex offender for life. Subject's case was evaluated. ICE officers were directed not to pursue arrest under the new guideline. Third case, deported alien twice, conviction for alien smuggling in the past, theft, illegal reentry, asked for permission to be able to interdict, was turned down by regional officers. It's going to be helpful to be able to get new guidance because the guidance that's currently existing is allowing individuals that are sex offenders, that are criminal aliens, multiple deportations. I can tell you stories of folks with multiple DUI convictions that are being instructed by regional leaders not to detain, deport, or arrest. That is a problem for us right now.
Senator, I can't speak to the particular cases that you cite and the facts involved, but let me say this. Yesterday, we announced the results to date of Operation SOAR, which is a law enforcement operation conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and they reported the arrest of 300 individuals who have committed sex offenses. So that is, in fact, a public safety threat that we do address aggressively. So I can't speak to the three cases that you cite, but I can champion the results of Operation SOAR and our focus on the public safety threat, and that includes individuals who've committed sex offenses.
Well, the last number I had was 6,000 ICE agents in the field and 3,000 detainments or deportations in the month. And that's one of the numbers that we're trying to request from your office to be able to get exact numbers and be able to track that, what's happening. And that would be very helpful to us.
Thank you.
We look forward to.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hawley?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I want to just review the record, your record in office, and the record of this administration to date. Since February, the first full month, of course, of the Biden administration, there have been 822,629 illegal crossing attempts encountered by CBP at the southwest border. Every single month of your tenure, we've seen over 100,000 illegal crossing attempts. Every single month in your tenure, illegal crossing attempts have increased. We've hit a 20-year record for illegal entries. We hit that last month. We've had a surge of young children across the border, placing these children in incredible danger and in the line of harm. On a single day in March, we had 6,000 children sitting in CBP custody, and including HHS facilities, we now have 15,000 migrant children currently in federal custody. In April, the number of deportations carried out by ICE fell to the lowest monthly level on record. Interior arrests by ICE have declined to about 2,500 arrests per month. That's down from 10,000 arrests per month under the previous administration. And the Washington Post and other news outlets have reported that with Border Patrol totally overwhelmed now by the surge of migrants crossing the border, the cartels are having an easier and easier time smuggling drugs across our border, which are going to states like mine, which are awash in drugs from across the southern border. Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, this record is an unmitigated disaster. It's a disaster. And I want to ask you to tell us and tell the American people now what you're going to do to change course.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Let me respond in a number of different ways. First of all, the number of migrants apprehended at the borders began to increase in April of last year. Number two, it's very important to remember that the number of apprehensions, the number of encounters, does not equal the number of different individuals encountered. Because we are exercising the Centers for Disease Control Title 42 authority to expel individuals, that means they are quickly processed for identity and expelled. They're not placed in immigration removal proceedings before the expulsion. They often return and are expelled again.
Mr. Secretary, my time is very, very limited here. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to be clear about something you just said. Are you saying that there has not been a dramatic surge in border crossings and unaccompanied children during your tenure, a historic surge? Is that your position?
That is not my position, and
Good.
Please allow me to finish my answer. What I am saying is that the number of encounters, the number of apprehensions, does not equal the number of different individuals apprehended, because we are seeing recidivism under Title 42, and individuals are being expelled more than once, number one. Number two, you cited the fact that 6,000 unaccompanied children were in CBP custody back in March. We are seeing only a fraction of that now, because we had a plan then. As I said then, it takes time to execute our plan. We have executed our plan, and the number is far different. Third, the smuggling of drugs, the greatest means of attempted transportation of drugs across the border are through the ports of entry, in trucks, in vehicles that can try to move large amounts. And we are apprehending more than before, and this began in October of last year because of the investment in technology and the focus on the ports of entry. We continue the work of the prior administration in that regard.
So, Mr. Secretary, do I take it from your answer then that your position is that we don't have a crisis at the southern border, that the surge is largely illusory, and we have no reason to be concerned? I mean, is that basically what you're saying here? There's no need to do anything differently because your policies are working? I mean, is that your answer? Your policies are working at the border?
That is a complete mischaracterization of what I said.
Are your policies working at the border?
What I have said before, and I repeat now.
Answer my question. Are your policies working at the border, Mr. Secretary? Yes or no? Are they working?
We have a plan. We are executing the plan. The plan takes time to execute, and we are doing so. And let me say this, what makes the plan more challenging is, number one, COVID, but we are working through that, and our plan addresses that challenge. And number
Wait a minute,
two,
COVID was at its height a year ago, Mr. Secretary, and with all due respect, we saw none of these numbers a year ago. This crisis has occurred under your tenure. COVID is not unique to your tenure. This is a crisis that you have engineered with your policies. Let me ask you about something you said to Senator Portman with regard to
and if I may say one last.
It's absolutely not true. You said to Senator Portman, it's absolutely not true that ICE officers have been told not to arrest people. That's what you said earlier today. That astounds me because ICE officers have asked me to ask you about the instructions your guidance has given them not to arrest individuals. For instance, the National ICE Council, that's the ICE union, has asked me to ask you, because they can't get answers from you, so they're asking me to do it, to ask you why officers who've been ICE officers who've requested permission to go after an illegal alien who was convicted of sexual assault of a minor under 14 years of age were denied the ability to go and arrest this person. Senator Langford raised another case where ICE officers were directed not to pursue a previously deported alien who was convicted for indecency with a child by sexual contact and confined for 5 years. This is a registered sex offender, and ICE officers were told not to remove this criminal alien. Why is this happening? Are you not concerned about these kind of criminals being released onto the streets and hurting children again?
Senator, those types of criminals are a priority for arrest and removal. That is what the guidelines say. I cannot speak to the specific, if I may finish, Senator, I cannot speak to the particular.
I heard you give that answer to Senator Langford, but why can't you? You are the secretary. Why can't you speak to these specifics? Are you not in charge of your department? Why can ICE officers not get answers from you? Why is it they have to come to me to get answers from you? Because they don't know what to do. They're desperate for guidance. Why can't you speak to these issues, Mr. Secretary?
Senator, if I may answer your question, if you would give me a moment to answer your question. I cannot speak to facts that are not in front of me. I cannot speak to cases without looking at the files and speaking to them with knowledge of the evidence and the facts. And I'd be very happy to look at the case files that you refer to, number one. Number two, I have traveled around the country and met with ICE officers, and I have answered their questions. And the first thing that is my responsibility to do when I am engaging with the ICE workforce is to give the union representative the opportunity to speak. And I have visited Philadelphia and New York and Atlanta and New Orleans and San Antonio and Los Angeles. And never once has the head of the union asked me a question. Never once have I received an inquiry in writing or orally from the head of the union, Chris Crane. And if he should ask me a question, I shall answer it, because I have been answering the questions of the individuals whom he is responsible to represent.
I'll be happy to give you these case issues for the record, and I look forward to your response for the record. And I would just say, Mr. Mayorkas, however much an inconvenience it may be for you to answer questions from me or from other senators on this committee or from the union, the people who you are in charge of and you're supposed to be supervising, it is your job. And frankly, I don't care if it's an inconvenience, and I don't care if you don't like it. It is your job to do so. And the fact that you are not able and not willing to respond to these specific queries is troublesome to me, but I'll give them to you for the record, and I look forward to your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That is actually, if I may say, also false. Your questions are not an inconvenience for me. All I ask is the opportunity to answer them.
I look forward to your answers.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Ossoff, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Secretary. Preventing the importation of goods produced with forced labor is a core priority for the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government. and the Department of Homeland Security has significant responsibility for that effort. An October 2020 GAO report reported, however, that forced labor division expenditures account for less than 1% of the total budget of the Office of Trade at CBP. And an October 20th, 2020 Homeland Security Investigations report from DHS-IG found that HSI did not have a cohesive approach to carrying out its responsibilities in combating human trafficking, and that, quote, HSI may have missed opportunities to assist and save victims and support U.S. attorneys in their prosecution efforts. How, Mr. Secretary, does your budget request this year fulfill DHS responsibilities to investigate and combat forced labor in supply chains for goods entering the United States and to prevent human trafficking?
Senator, so we are very focused on this scourge of forced labor and human trafficking. I read every week of the tremendous work that Homeland Security investigations perform. Almost every week, they deliver a case that brings accountability to the perpetrators of this crime. I also participated in a press conference of a major forced labor action by Customs and Border Protection and its Office of Trade. The budget reflects the work. I know of no financial shortfall with respect to our ability to perform this mission set. And if it is of concern to you, I'd be very pleased to meet with you and discuss that.
I look forward to that, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to ask you about the focus in your budget request, as well as in your testimony today, on domestic terrorism and domestic violent extremism. And let me first of all state that there's much more to threat assessment than recent historical casualty numbers. And of course, I recognize that your department's responsibility is not to enforce local law. But I want to nevertheless offer you these numbers and gain some perspective on how you've come to the threat assessment that's informed your budget request. According to DHS FBI data, from 2015 to 2019, 65 Americans were tragically killed in domestic terrorist attacks. And I want to put that in context by referring to CDC homicide data over the same period, 2015 to 2019. 94,636 Americans killed by homicide over that same period. Again, there is more to threat assessment, I recognize, than the historical casualty data. But what leads you to the conclusion that the level of threat from domestic violent extremists and the level of threat posed by potential domestic terrorists has risen to the extent that it justifies this bureaucratic focus and this budgetary focus? You've requested, for example, resources to establish a new dedicated domestic terrorism branch within DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis.
Senator, it's a very important question. Our research, our analysis, which is not only drawn from the work that we ourselves perform, but we harness the work in academia and private organizations. What we see is an increasing amount of social media traffic that is based on ideologies of hate and extremism, false narratives, and an increasing connectivity to violence, intention to commit violent acts. And so that is what causes us to conclude that this is the greatest terrorist-related threat that we face in our homeland today. And what we are doing is, through the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnership, what we seek to do is more effectively disseminate what we learn about those trends, mindful of rights of privacy and civil rights and civil liberties, disseminate that information to our state, local, tribal, territorial partners on the one hand, and importantly, to equip local communities, to empower them to address the threat in their own neighborhoods. We cannot do it as effectively as the people in the communities themselves, the trusted individuals, families, friends, teachers, faith leaders, and the like. We've learned a great deal from prior efforts to counter violent extremism in the 2014-2016 timeframe. And what we've learned is that it is best to empower and equip communities and first responders in those communities to act.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to shift to a discussion of cybersecurity with a particular focus on Georgia's needs. As you well know, Georgia hosts the Port of Savannah, which is one of the fastest growing ports in the United States, indeed in the hemisphere, vital not just to Georgia's economy, but to the U.S. economy. We continue to see the impact of ransomware attacks and other cyber attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure, the Colonial Pipeline attack. Colonial Pipeline also headquartered in Georgia. I want to thank your personnel who assisted in the response to that incident. My request for you, Mr. Secretary, is that you commit that the next time you have occasion to visit Georgia, and I hope we'll welcome you soon, that you'll sit down with me and Georgia Ports Authority personnel to discuss how DHS can better support cybersecurity to protect the Port of Savannah. And perhaps you could comment now as well on your overall assessment of efforts to protect ports from cyber attack.
So this is a very important area for us. Our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is very focused on port security in the cyber domain. And yes, Senator, I would be pleased to visit Georgia and visit the Ports Authority with you and address their concerns with respect to cybersecurity. And of course, I would bring colleagues from CISA who are most expert in that work.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And finally, on the same note, we face a significant shortage of qualified cybersecurity professionals. This is a field of growing importance to national security. It's a field that's rapidly expanding, and we need to ensure that the pipeline of well-trained, highly qualified cybersecurity professionals is wide open and that there's diversity in the pipeline generating that cybersecurity workforce. Do you agree that a priority for the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress should be expanding our nation's capacity to train highly qualified cybersecurity workforce that can, for example, support the effort to protect the Port of Savannah and other critical infrastructure?
Senator, I most certainly do. And on that point, our department, the Department of Homeland Security, is underway in the largest, most intense cybersecurity recruiting effort in the department's history.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony and your service, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to thank you once again for your service to our country and your willingness to tackle these incredibly challenging challenges that you have before you, and also have an opportunity to thank the men and women who serve each and every day in the Department of Homeland Security to keep us safe. Certainly, I think every member in this committee is thankful for the work that you do and everybody at the Department of Homeland Security. And we look forward to working closely with you as we work to overcome these challenges. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until August 11th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.